So it could be extremely radical, but very positive. So I think that perhaps has persisted over time. But of course, there's also the downside of the motivational, inspirational stuff about permaculture, that we can live as part of a natural system without the contradictions of exploitation or alternatively failing to provide for our needs. And some aspects of permaculture, I suppose, have been oversold. The idea of lying under the grapevine, the self-organising system where everything works itself. And especially modern people used to very sedentary lifestyles sometimes get a shock about what's actually involved in working with natural systems, and that it's not maybe as easy as they imagined. So there's always been that tension in permaculture education between the inspiring people to make a start and get active, and all the evidence about, well, you need to know about this or be aware of this trap or whatever. And there are problems with pursuing both those strategies. And in the early years, I used to be quite critical of the way Bill Mollison tended to sell grand the image. And obviously there's a lot of mistakes and collateral damage from that process. People who go out and try something and then reach the first difficult obstacle and say, well, that was all a load of rubbish, that didn't work. So many people became inoculated against permaculture because early examples they saw of it or things they tried to do didn't work. Even though the idea may have been sound, but the actual implementation was actually more complicated. And I tended to respond to that with, well, I would lay all the cards on the table, tell everyone about everything I knew about something. But what I found was that sometimes people would go, oh, it's very complicated, isn't it? I'm not sure that I could do that. So that different people need different messages, and at different stages of people's lives they need different messages. So there's, it's been a roller coaster, I suppose, over time of the successes and failures and strengths and weaknesses of permaculture. But that's true of any movement that tries to change society in a fairly substantial way. Well, the ecological crisis, of course, in its widest sense of being an energy, environment and design of industrial civilization crisis that we are in, was one of the fundamental drivers in the creation of permaculture over 30 years ago. And we saw that it required that we redesigned everything we did. Now, to do that, we can't just change a technology here or change a practice there. We actually have to go back to first principles, back to the drawing board. And that's why permaculture design principles are so critical to developing the thinking needed to get past the thinking that created the industrial civilization that we're in, because that civilization is coming to an end, by hook or by crook, over time, through generations. That one is coming to an end because it was built on free, non-renewable energy. And the characteristics of a world reflect the underlying energy in the same way that every ecosystem is determined to a large extent in its structure and its basic characteristics by the nature and concentration of its energy sources. So as we move from a world of abundant non-renewable energy to limited and cyclical renewable energy from nature, we have to change everything we do. And if we actually look at permaculture principles, they are the things we have to do. So permaculture at that level is a much deeper framework for what today is called sustainability. And we believe that that is still the best thinking framework out there. But it's not just a thinking framework that is sitting isolated in academia in the heads of a few people. It's actually got out there down and dirty in the world over the last 30 years. You know, everywhere from the richest countries in the world like Scandinavia and USA and Australia through to some of the poorest countries in the world in many different social and environmental contexts. So it's a bit tested in that sense. Now, I'm not suggesting that permaculture can easily sort of be the magic wand that makes this very deep systemic crisis go away, because it's really not a problem that can be solved in the conventional sense. We are moving into a world which will be so different from the one we've come from that it's like a death process. It's got to be a death and rebirth process. Now, whether that happens through a series of catastrophes or through more gradual evolutionary processes remains to be seen. But certainly a lot of activists around the world see that now crisis and collapse to some degree or other is an almost inevitable part of that process. And again, permaculture, because of its decentralised, bottom-up, simple things, behavioural design changes that don't require complex organisational, centralised, globalised systems to work, is part of this resilience that enable us to work with the flow, go with the flow of this change. And of course that's influencing movements that are emerging, like the Transition Towns movement has come out of permaculture activism, and you know, specifically looking at how do we move into a world where there is actually less energy and resources per person on the planet, effectively every year, less and less, and how do we reconfigure that as a positive process that can be transformative in a good sense rather than just a death process. But we are going down that pathway whether we like it or not, so we may as well work out how to make it a positive pathway, and permaculture design principles as thinking tools are part of the enabling tools to allow us to do that.